with him closely and have admired him all these years for his contributions. So what we propose to do here is to hear from a select few of them who have worked closely with him and have seen him guide the development of biotechnology. And today, when we look back on those things that happened more than 30 years ago, we are kind of astounded that the predictions that Dr. Ramachandran made have come true, probably a little more than he had imagined. I'm sure he would be happy to see this progress, and some of us would be reflecting on what we have seen while we were closely working with him. So I would now request Dr. Renu Swarup, the former Secretary of Biotechnology, DBT. She was the Secretary of Biotechnology till recently. She has got many distinctions to her credit. The programs that she has supported, the industry partnership, even the research on the COVID vaccines, the tremendous leadership that she has displayed. I wouldn't embarrass her by talking more about it. The CV that we have circulated of the panelists are on the website for the young listeners to read and understand. I would stop there and now invite Dr. Renu Swarup to reflect on the contributions of Dr. Ramachandran. Each panelist will be having about 7 to 8 minutes. So that means about 8 minutes into 7:56, an hour or so, followed by a few questions if necessary. So it's to you, Dr. Renu Swarup. Welcome, Dr. Renu Swarup.
Thank you very much, Dr. John, and thank you all for, first of all, compliments for putting this whole session together. I must compliment each of you who has worked on getting this whole session together, because I think there is no better way than this to pay tribute to Dr. Ramachandran. Very rightly said, a builder of biotechnology. And Dr. John, when I spoke with you, you said you have to recall the contributions of Dr. Ramachandran. When I start doing that, I go back into more than 32 years when I first joined the department. And he was the one he was the secretary of the department at that point of time. And he interviewed me for a position of a senior scientific officer. And since then, the interaction that I had with him, each day that I interacted with him was a learning. It was a learning because that is what Dr. Ramachandran was, a mentor, a guide in his own very different way. And if today, where we stand on the strong biotechnology foundation, which has given us the opportunity to be a leader in biotechnology as a country, not just recognized for COVID vaccines or others, but all across. Globally, India is recognized today. It's because of the very, very strong foundation that Dr. Ramachandran built. And I will spend a minute or so recalling my own interaction with him first before I get into the larger ecosystem that he built. As a young researcher who had just come back from my postdoc from UK, as I said, Dr. Ramachandran was the secretary and he interviewed a bunch of us. And when few of us got selected as the first batch of senior scientific officers, there was, of course, a batch that had come in from BSc where Dr. Suman Govil and Dr. Natesh was the senior ones who had brought in. And you could see that he carried on
Some disturbance.
There is somebody who's got his mic on. Ramachandran,
can I ask you to switch off your microphones? Yeah, microphones. Can you just close it?
I'm glad to see that Surya is also there.
Yes, I'm here, madam. Thank you so much for saying these wonderful words.
And
but I remember Dr. S. Ramachandran as a father, right? And he was very strict on certain things. He was very lenient. If he scolded you, he'll come to your room and say oh, don't worry about it. It's okay. And back in the Calcutta days when I had like a experience of like a
So I think that's exactly what I was saying, that when I joined in as a young officer, it was such a pleasure to interact with a secretary like him who would be very, very firm on any of the actions that he had to take on, giving us guidance, etc. But he also had this wonderful way in teaching you what it is to take on new activities.
like do not buy him in the
I was very fortunate that I spent 32 years in the department and then on
my
with
father let him know
technology. And at each step, whether it was in my growth in the career that I had, or when I occupied the position of the secretary for 3.5 years, at every moment, I think we remember Dr. Ramachandran very, very fondly. If today you see the ecosystem that exists, and I know all my senior colleagues here are going to speak about specific programs, the regulation, the human resource, and I'm sure Dr. Natesh is going to talk about the National Bioresource Development Board, which were key and critical for building the foundations of biotechnology. But at that point of time, when you look at 1986, when biotechnology was just coming around, to have a visionary like Dr. Ramachandran, very rightly said by Dr. John, who, who envisioned that a couple of years from now, we will need three very important pillars of biotechnology: the capacity, both in terms of infrastructure and human resource. And he focused on that. The cutting edge technology expertise. And he built these centers of excellence. I do recall the centers for plant molecular biology because I was dealing with it along with my colleague, Dr. K.S. Chirk. And they were in every field, whether it was aquaculture, whether it was the bioresources, whether it was agriculture, whether it was medical biotechnology. He built these centers of excellence to bring in expertise in cutting edge technologies, knowing that these are the futuristic technologies for the future. And the third important pillar that he focused on was collaborations, both national and international. India became a very, very favored partner in collaborating. And nationally, it was not just an interministerial collaboration. At that point of time in 1986, where we never even spoke about industrial research in other areas, DBT was the first department, and I'm sure Dr. Ghosh will speak about it. He was heading the industry division of how we collaborated with industry, whether it was for drugs and pharma sector or whether it was for the agriculture sector. I think these three C's that he taught me very early on in my career: capacity, cutting edge technology, and
Thank you
collaboration.
so much, ma'am.
This is something that I took along
Renu Swarup,
activities that we took
my
forward.
father, used to say, this is one person who's come out of the universities. She's gonna do something in her life.
So I think, Dr. John, there is some disturbance, but I don't know how many minutes I've spent because I can go on and on and on talking about Dr. Ramachandran. But we have to remember one thing, that today, if we have skills and capacities, it's because we built those centers across the country of human resource. If we have the best of regulation in the country, which we have been able to now take forward in many, many areas, whether it's our today, if you look at the medical biotechnology, it's drugs and pharmaceuticals. We had the best regulatory ecosystem that was developed. Dr. Ramachandran was also credited with a very, very important trait that he had as a senior, as a mentor, as a visionary, of being very good in planning and policy. The Department of Biotechnology played a very important role in policy. And we have, in fact, looked at policy planning, which has given us a roadmap, which we are even following today. The roadmap that we have for although there is a large and encompassing S&T policy, Dr. Ramachandran's role in each area, whether it was in agriculture or bioresource or medical, we brought out roadmaps and strategies.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
The other aspect that we look at, in which Dr. Ramachandran guided us very good, was
As like a father, I would like to say a couple of words before the panel has a discussion.
the competitive grant system that DBT built is today, you look at every scientist in the country who's doing anything in biotechnology, I think they have experienced that competitive grant system. And again, the foundations of it were laid at that point of time when Dr. Ramachandran came. So, Dr. John, I can go on and on, as I said, each aspect. I can only conclude by saying this, that as I told you, as I grew in my career in the Department of Biotechnology, every program that I started, new program, and Dr. Ramachandran was also a wonderful human being. He gave a young officer like me, who was just an SSO with no experience at all, the opportunity to build
Yes,
new
ma'am. Yes,
programs.
ma'am.
But
If you don't mind, let me just interject in this wonderful panel that I have to give credit to all those people who started this panel. But as a son of somebody who's Dr. Ramchandran, you have to walk in those shadows now. So just give me 2 minutes to explain to you
I'm
who the
concluding
person
now,
was.
I'm
At
concluding,
home,
hand it over to Dr. John, and then he will moderate it
Uh,
further. So
yeah,
thank you, Dr.
yeah.
John. I think
Okay.
I'll
I
hand
mean,
it over to you.
yeah. Surya, Surya, can I request you to come in a little later?
College Coimbatore, my mom would say do not buy me a motorcycle. My dad would say I buy me a motorcycle, yeah.
Surya. Surya.
Break and he
Surya.
learned. And he
Hey,
Okay.
Surya.
never once said
Surya, I think let's
I
put,
went to the computers, he went to in biotechnology. He never he said those days we were in Moti Bagh, C1 by 10 in Moti Bagh. He said, you want to become a Jamadar? Those people who sleep, you become the best Jamadar.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Renu Swarup. I would now call upon Dr. P.K. Ghosh. Dr. P.K. Ghosh, former advisor of the Department of Biotechnology. He had many positions, distinctive positions, and he is known as a man of regulation, a man who pioneered regulation, who handled regulation. And Ramachandran was particularly keen on this field. And I understand that Dr. Ramachandran brought him from the Department of Industries, because this was one of the cornerstones on which Dr. Ramachandran built the programs of the department. So let me not say more about what Dr. Ghosh might be saying. I would simply invite Dr. Ghosh to reflect on our great Dr. Ramachandran.
Thank you very much for your kind words, Dr. John. Good evening, and thank you, organizers, for giving me an opportunity to participate in this meeting. I have a phone call. Let me stop it. Oh. Okay. Dr. Ramchandran was the first secretary of the Department of Biotechnology, and he was there from February 28, 1986 to September 30, 1992. I met him for the first time a couple of times later also during 1979 and 1980, when he used to come to discuss on issues relating to Bengal immunity with the government. Bengal immunity was a Sikh private company, and the management was taken over by the central government with a view to revive it. Dr. Ramchandran was appointed as the executive director of Bengal Immunity, Kolkata, where he was deputed from Hindustan Antibiotics Limited, Pune, probably in February 1979. At Hindustan Antibiotics, he was the general manager R&D. Dr. Ramachandran used to come to Shastri Bhavan to meet the bureaucrats at the Department of Chemicals and Fertilizers, Ministry of Petroleum and Chemicals, and the bureaucrats were the administrative heads looking after the large-scale drugs and pharmaceutical industry of the country for regulated growth administered through policies including licensings for manufacture and imports of drugs and pharmaceutical substances. All drug manufacturing public sector units and Bengal Immunity were also under the Department of Chemicals and Fertilizers. Dr. Ramachandran used to visit the officers relating to various administrative and financial matters. He also met me a couple of times to discuss technical issues relating to setting up of basic manufacturing plants for chloroquine phosphate, an anti-malarial drug, and 6-amino penicillinic acid, or 6-APA in short, a drug intermediate from potassium penicillin G. On 6-APA, Dr. Ramachandran had hands-on experience on lab-scale technology development for splitting of 6-APA from potassium penicillin G using acylase catalyst isolated from E. coli. I was then working as Project Officer Drugs, cum Deputy Development Commissioner Drugs at the Department of Chemicals and Fertilizers, Shastri Bhavan. But I knew him very closely when I joined DBT. I joined DBT in May 1987, where I stayed up to May 2002. During my close interaction with Dr. Ramachandran at DBT, I soon realized that he had a surmountable vision to take biotechnology to great heights. He was very laborious, methodical, and used to read a lot to remain current on multiple aspects of application-oriented biotechnology. During his time and earlier, there was no recombinant DNA product in the Indian market. He used to tell me that new biotech products are for the future, and unless we leap forward in setting up modern biotech industries, conduct high-class research, develop technologies, and involve industry for teaming up, we would remain behind, and there would be no way of catching up with the rest of the world. He was a living inspiration to us. He also invited and brought the most capable scientists from India and abroad to the DBT to learn from them. He was very close to our late Prime Minister Sri Rajiv Gandhi. With his encouragement and leadership, we from DBT were able to lead the biotech industry through industrial and technology policy framing up, policy implementation, scaling up of mechanism for Indian institutional technology development and transfer of such technologies to the industry, setting up of methods for introduction of simple, easy to use diagnostic kits for disease detection and manufacture of modern recombinant DNA-based technologies and industries in the country. I think Dr. Ramachandran was the strongest inspiration for the development of Indian biotechnology face before the world, which include skilled manpower development, modern biotechnology institution building, research and technology development in the country and their applications, and also fostering multi-country collaborations with Indian academic and R&D institutions. In one sentence, I feel and believe that without him, our biotechnology would not have such a phenomenal progress in India. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ghosh, for that effective summary, trying to capture the many facets of a man who continues to be fascinating, who continues to be fascinating. Now, Welcome, Madam Ms. Bhama Ramachandran. Welcome, ma'am. It's a privilege to have you here. We are privileged to see you on this panel. We are very happy to have you. Thanks for joining. Thanks for joining and giving us the privilege of your presence. Now, with that from Dr. Ghosh, I would now invite Dr. Natesh to reflect on Dr. Ramachandran. I'm sure he has many things. He's raring to go. And Dr. Natesh, the floor is yours, and you have approximately 7 to 8 minutes. Dr. Natesh, former senior advisor of the Department of Biotechnology.
Kindly unmute.
Unmute.
Natesh.
So, first of all, thank you, Professor Kannan and George, for inviting me to be a part of this panel. And I was with the National Biotechnology Board, which was the previous avatar of DBT, since 1984 when I joined, and I came to know Dr. Ramachandran at that time. I had just joined the DST from my previous stint was in the University of Delhi, where I had taught for some years. And those days, people were selected for government jobs through UPSC. In fact, that was probably one of the last phases when UPSC selected people for science and technology. And we were asked to go around the DST and see who would fit our qualifications and interests in science. And one of the things that many people told me was, there is this new cell in DBT, which is new cell in DST, which is the National Biotechnology Board. But this person who is heading it is very, very strict and hard to please. You may or may not be selected there. So go around and anyway and meet him. So I went and, sought an appointment with him, and then eventually I met him. And he took an interview, a second interview of mine for about an hour and a half, asking me all sorts of questions on petrocrops and electron transport and photosystem 1 and 2 and God knows what else. And finally he said, okay, you can join now. And then I joined the National Biotechnology Board at that time. This board was an interagency board, and it was headed by the Planning Commission member science at that time. And the members consisted of various heads of DST, CSIR, ICMR, DAE, UGC, and Secretary of Expenditure, and so on. Dr. Ghosh and before that, Dr. Renu Swarup have already mentioned several attributes of Dr. Ramachandran. And I'm going to concentrate on 3-4 things that I am very familiar with, having worked with him very closely. I would like to say that he always stood for Indian science and scientists. And I'm going to give you an example of this. In 1985, I joined in 1984, and the first job I was given was to organize an international workshop for the ICGEB, or the International Center for Biotechnology and Genetic Engineering, which had just been set up at that time. And the workshop was to be on biotechnology in agriculture. And the purpose of this was to evolve an agenda for the New Delhi component of ICGEB. And about 60 scientists from about 15 countries participated in this 5-day workshop. And, they were some of the who was who in agricultural biotechnology at that time, plant molecular biologists and so on. All the foreign participants were accommodated in a five-star hotel, I forget which one, in Connaught Place. But due to some, one of those stupid government rules, Indian participants could not be accommodated in five-star hotels those days. I'm talking of 1985. And they were to stay in some of the guest houses of our national institutes. So Dr. Ramachandran said that this is not acceptable, and he took up this issue with the finance department, and they wouldn't budge. So he said, no, I'm not going to have Indian participants staying somewhere else. So he got the industry to sponsor the hotel stay of all the Indian participants as well. And then they could stay in the same five-star hotel where all the other overseas participants were staying. So this is something that reflects on the man, and he wouldn't want Indian scientists to be treated any differently than their overseas, colleagues. He was also, and you have heard this from everyone who spoke before me, he was a great visionary leader. And, one of the things that was it later became one of the flagship programs of DBT. And there was a technology mission on oil seeds, which was part of Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi's mission programs those days. And DBT was involved in oil seeds mission. And our role was to produce tissue culture plants of coconut and oil palm for large scale plantation. So we found we funded several programs at some 6-7 institutions. And Dr. Ramachandran said, oil palm is a new crop to this country, and we must actually learn how to grow it, how to grow it on a large scale. And he said, we must import oil seeds of this, and we demonstrated how to grow this as a smallholder crop for the first time in 3 states with 1,000 hectares each. And till then, let me tell you that the Agriculture Ministry's method of demonstrating any crop was on 1 hectare plot everywhere. So this was a plantation crop, and Dr. Ramachandran wouldn't stop at fruit production for oil seeds mission. He said, oil is the end product for us, and therefore we must also set up oil expressing plants. So this was a great thinking on his part, and we set up oil producing mills in these 3 states, and later this program became a model for the technology mission on oil seeds, which became it expanded on several hectares of land. Now I'm told that there are something like 9,000 or 10,000 hectares of land under oil palm today, after we initially did this. The other issue was, today we talk of public-private partnerships. And one of the earliest public-private partnership programs that we did was on in vitro cultivation of small cardamom. We brought in a company from Cochin called A.V. Thomas and Company. And then we involved Spices Board, and DBT was the lead organizing agency. And then we did this on 104 hectares in 3 different states on farmers' land, tissue cultures, plantlets being grown on actually farmers' land. So this was a very visionary thinking for those days, involving industry, doing this on large scale, and then doing this on farmers' land. Dr. Ramachandran was also a very, very hardworking person, and he demanded hard work from others. And whether it was a small presentation to a group of people in a university, or it was a presentation to be made to the Prime Minister, he worked so hard for each of them. And, he always used to tell me, if I have to present 8 points at a lecture, I need to know 34 points myself. And therefore, he would actually sit and study and then also make a presentation to some of us and say, now come on, ask questions, shoot questions. Let's see if what other dimensions could be there for this program and so on. This is something that most of us have imbibed, at least many of us have imbibed in DBT as a lesson in doing things, with hard work, dedication, and, complete involvement in a program. Also, he was a very generous boss and a very generous person himself. I mentioned about this technology mission and oil seeds, and there was an occasion towards 1991 when all the secretaries were asked to make a presentation of the progress of this mission in front of the Prime Minister. By that time, we had done well in this program, and then from the PMO, he was invited to make a presentation to then Prime Minister Narasimha Rao. And he said, no, this is your program, and you're going to make a presentation. Now, I'm sure most bosses would grab an opportunity to go and make a presentation themselves and not give such an opportunity to a young and junior colleague of theirs. But he said, since you are the nodal person for this program, you go and present this. And I had to make a 10-minute presentation with slides to the Prime Minister then, and I was asked questions. Fortunately, with all the hard work and guidance of Dr. Ramachandran, everything came out well. But this goes to show how selfless he was, what kind of a mentor that he was, what kind of a person, selfless person that he was. And as others mentioned, I could keep going on and on about him. And, there are so many instances that I recall with every program that we were involved with. But I think this is a brief flavor of the person and the scientist and the leader that Dr. Ramachandran was. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Natesh, for those interesting anecdotes, those snippets, not just repeating the science part of it, but the person, the human side, what he was. So nice of you to have recalled all that. Having done that, can I now request Professor Kannan to speak on Dr. Ramachandran? Dr. Kannan.
Yeah. Thank you, George. For me, the starting of NBTB and my joining CCMB overlapped same time, the year 1982. And Professor Dr. Ramachandran used to visit. CCMB was a new setup. We were all young bunch of people in the 25 to 30 age group, and he will come and interact with us. Very excited, what he's trying to do. So I was quite floored by the kind of vision the man had. And mind you, I had just returned from England in Imperial College, and having a lot of exposure to people like the work of E.B. Chain, who got the Penicillin Nobel Prize, and other people. We had a huge fermenter of 5,000 liters there, where I had operated on. But what I want to say is that coming back, I could see a man who had that kind of vision, what was happening elsewhere in the world, because at that time only Biogen, Genentech, all these things were just coming up. So coming to India and hearing him was certainly a point. I said, yeah, what am I doing in CCMB? Will I get a chance? And fortunately, in 1985, the 5 MSc programs started in India. One of them was in Pune. And Professor Sohan Modak was on a hunt to find people who could, teach the program. So in 85, I remember in CCMB, he said, Kannan, can you come and spend 2-3 days with our students in MSc Biotechnology? And I said, okay, I'll come happily. And I said, I'll teach them some sequencing, how it is done, how are proteins characterized, how are they isolated. So I did an actual hands-on workshop for 2 days. I could see the enthusiasm in the students because they didn't know what they were doing, very honestly, because biotechnology was a new program. And they were so excited that they went and told Sohan Modak, I'm sure Sudhir Prayaga will approve what I'm just saying, that they all apparently went to Sohan, said, try to get this man somehow. We want him as a teacher. And that's how I landed up in Pune University in 86, even though I was quite comfortable in CCMB, which was a more prestigious institution. But everybody in my house shouted, you're going to a state university. You know, you are in a central place. What are you doing? You'll become director there. I said, no, I want to enjoy life. I'm not interested to be bound like this because things will happen, whatever it is. And I must tell, you know, this is where Ramachandran's vision comes. You know, I never realized that the program was very tight because he brought in sort of whether to right to say it's a paradigm shift or not. He said, no, look, the core structure for biotechnology, we must use biological cells to make products and processes. He was very, very clear on this. So I remember he created the National Animal Tissue Culture Facility. It just so happened that it happened next to my room in Pune University, where Ullas Wagh was there. So I could see that. Then we were very fortunate in Pune that NCL was there. And thanks to V. Jagannathan, you know, there was a very good plant tissue culture facility and Mascarenhas was there. So we said, okay, we will start plant tissue culture, we'll start animal tissue culture. Then we said, okay, molecular biology, anyway, Sohan Modak was fancy about it, so fine. Then NCL agreed to help us with biochemical engineering because Mashelkar was very active those days. He was only a deputy director then. And the best part of it all was that we also had Kolaska who joined us to start the bioinformatics. So we had a whole set of computers. So by 86, we were in no way less and the students were made to work very, very hard. In fact, let me tell you, I used to work 26 hours per week, including Sundays. You know, so I'm sure these children had a real tough time because I don't know where they landed up. And such a program has never existed because Pune University, the lights burned only in zoology department throughout the night. And another one was the, astrophysics center, which Jan Narlikar was heading. These are the only two departments. Otherwise, the rest of the university was sleeping. So what I'm trying to say is, suddenly these children withstood that crash program of, attending so many courses, etc. And to cut the long story short, in the very first batch when they passed out, 18 students appeared for the CSIR net and all the 18 got the scholarship. I don't think any university can boast of 100% result from the first batch which appeared. So that was the level to which I think when I look back, Ramachandran insisted that these courses should be taught and this thing. Now, these students, okay, now you may ask what happened to them later. And some of them went to USA and I find, we are all talking about CAR T cell technology. And I know one of the girls who's passed out from Pune University was one of the champion in launching this product called Kimria, which was the first CAR T cell technology. There are so many others children have done. But what I'm trying to say is that our children were well equipped to be successful anywhere in the world. So if you look today, we have people in Roche as vice presidents or Pfizer as senior directors or entrepreneurs like Sudhir Prayaga. It produced a whole bunch of students all over the world that, and plus in India, many of them won Bhatnagar Awards and, which I feel very good because the present secretary of DBT is also a biotechnology student of the BTech program for the MSc program in IIT Bombay, where I am also an alumni from the same. So I think I'm sure if Dr. Ramachandran was around or seeing from the heaven or wherever he is, I would feel that we should be, he must be smiling that, look, my efforts have not gone waste. I think and this is true of many people who have done. I can't quote everybody because of shortage of time, but I think human resource development, I think Dr. Ramachandran's contribution will remain for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kannan, for that. Those forceful words. You have brought the man and his contributions to the forefront.
Can
Now,
I add a point here? Just
Yeah, sure.
I would like to vouch what Professor Kannan has just mentioned. I was one of the beneficiary of Dr. Ramachandran's vision, I guess. I'm not personally don't know him, but I happen to be the first batch of biotechnology from Pune University. And many of my colleagues, at least 3 of us have started business, India and US. I have my business in US and India. Now we are manufacturing diagnostic tests in India. Many of my colleagues are in faculties in many universities, and all of us are very successful. And all this, I should say, credit goes to Ramachandran and Professor Modak and other visionaries who helped to launch biotechnology in India. And thank you all. Thank you very much.
thank you, Dr. Sudhir. I'm supposed to be wearing the hat of a moderator, but I also have the privilege of sharing my reflections, my experience with Dr. Ramachandran. Let me make the opening statement that I worked with him only for 6 months, but I have not stopped admiring the man. 6 months in the sense I joined as Director Animal Biotechnology in April 1992. Dr. Ramachandran retired in September 1992, just after 6 months. So my official association had been for 6 months, but in a personal capacity, I had been interacting with him for many, many years. Now, I joined the Department of Biotechnology primarily because of the focus of the department on aquaculture. Aquaculture was my discipline. And initially, I used to wonder, Dr. Ramachandran, with his background, how could he steer a program as diverse as aquaculture? But then the story is that he had been analyzing the various sectors, and he found that India had those prawn species which were producing a miserable 600 kilos in 1 hectare. The same species in the Southeast Asian countries like Philippines was producing something like 3,000 kilos, 5 times. So he was puzzled why this should happen. And the pundits in those days said, no, it will not be possible here. But he would not take any of that. He asked the Marine Products Export Development Authority, Dr. Shaktivel, again a very dynamic person. He said, I want this to be checked in India under Indian conditions. Dr. Shaktivel said, we'll have to do the following. We'll have to get imported feed. He said, do what you want. Test them under similar conditions, under the proper management condition. And in the first year, we were able to demonstrate 3,000 kilos per hectare in every culture. In the second year, it went to 4,000 kilos, and in the third year, it went to 5,000 years. That started a sort of a chain reaction in the shrimp farming industry. A lot of people came into the industry. It's a different story that some fly-by-night operators also came. Everybody wants to make quick money, but the industry grew rapidly. It grew so rapidly that its implications were seen in the freshwater sector. If I look at the figures in those days, I'm not giving you those figures. I would say that the growth in aquaculture has been astronomical, and India has produced a lot, and commercialization has taken place so effectively. It is all because of the that jump start which Dr. Ramachandran gave through the open demonstration of semi-intensive prawn farming in Nellore. He was keen that there should be no lag in taking this up. So he asked MPDA to hire farms which are readily available, not to construct them. He said, no, we don't want to waste any time in constructing, having infrastructure in place. Let's start from day one. So that was the phenomenal thing that he was able to do. I used to wonder how did he take a fascination for something which is not connected with his field? But it's the man's thinking, he tries to see where something more can be done, whether it is aquaculture, whether it is animal biotechnology, with which I work with him closely, the embryo transfer program. NDDB was one of our major collaborators along with other national institutes. And he used to take personal interest in all those monitoring committees, and his knowledge of all these things were really insightful. He would always look at the other side of it. So what are the implications? What are its implications in terms of production? Let me give you one small example. There was a program related to embryo transfer technology, which is known as open nucleus breeding system. I'm not going into the technicalities. In the sum and substance is that the program was designed to produce genetically evaluated bulls, superior bulls. Now, this program I was handling, and the investment from DBT was something like 5 crores. The program was over, and during that time, I had gone abroad for an assignment. I returned to DBT after 5 years. And again, the program came back to me, the animal biotechnology and aquaculture. And naturally, it came back to me, and I was fascinated. I wanted to know what happened to the open nucleus breeding scheme. I asked the NDDB, now that it's over, our funding is over, you are still continuing with the project. Can you give me a rough estimate on what is the actual benefits in terms of increased milk production? Now we are looking at an investment of 4 crores. NDDB, Dr. Trivedi came back to me and said, it is something like today's benefit, if you compute total it will be something like 8,000 to 10,000 crores. I said, are you out of your head? Have you made a mistake? Have you added zeros unnecessarily? He said, no. I said, you go back again and check your figures. He came back very methodically, he verified, and he said, our estimates show that it should be something between 8,000 to 10,000 crores. Now that became a kind of a trump card for me. I would use it, I would flaunt it in the discussions with the then planning commission, the Niti Aayog. So that is the multiplier effect of the various things that he initiated, and he could think across the sectors, whether it's aquaculture, whether it's microbes, whether it's plant tissue culture, whether it's cardamom, whether it's fermentation technology, so on and so forth. So that is a cross-cutting impression that he had about the various sectors, and he knew what precisely would bring about an intervention in the favorable manner. Well, he was a taskmaster. If he wanted a note on something, he would want you to prepare 5 of them related to things, and you get frustrated. He used only one. Why did he trouble me? But then that was the man. And when it came to deadlines, his deadlines and the targets were yesterday, not today. It's over. So you are always behind schedule. You have to keep jogging to make sure that you keep pace with him. One of the things which I remember, he would always say, we must have a paperless office. I thought what is he talking about? How can it be so impractical? But today, that is exactly what we have. A year ago, I went to Renu Swarup. I sat with her. I said, are you really having a paperless office? Because I'm so uncomfortable without those piles of files on the left side and the right side. She said, no, this is it. And she opened the computer. She said, this is the file. If I sign it, I click it, and there ends the matter. I still haven't been able to understand. I won't be comfortable going back to DBT in a paperless office. But then that is exactly what Ramachandran used to visualize. This is in 1992. A man ahead of his time, a man who was thinking of things which others had not seen, but he knew that was really coming. And that is where we pay tribute to this great man. And I'm sure, I don't know if he's watching us, whether he's in that same manner, but nevertheless, we would be happy to place on record our deepest sense of admiration for the contributions that he done. The country should be grateful for his contributions. And let me also join all of you in saying a big thank you to him. Remember him. And Madam, thank you, Mrs. Ramachandran, for having come here. It was so nice of you to have come here. I wasn't sure. I got your number from Dr. Ramaswamy, and Dr. Ramaswamy also promised to drop in. And if he's there, we would probably invite him for a minute or so for his kind intervention. Thank you so much. It's been
so much
to be part of this discussion. And with that, I would now request Professor Krishna Swamy to reflect. In fact, In fact, Dr. Krishnaswamy's name was suggested by Professor Balram, and Dr. Balram said Dr. Krishnaswamy would be able to give insights which nobody else would give, because he has seen Ramachandran from a different level. And Professor Krishnaswamy, we look forward to your reminiscences of Dr. Ramachandran. Professor Krishnaswamy.
Thank you very much, Dr. George. I think you said this very correctly, because I will I saw Ramachandran from a very different perspective. First, as a friend who was introduced to me by Dr. Ashok Ganguly, who was the chairman of Hindustan River, and his predecessor, Dr. Varadarajan, with whom he also worked later, both of whom were known to me. And I was working at the Jaslok Hospital Research Center in Mumbai. And one day Ashok Ganguly brought Ramachandran to my lab on the 6th floor. And I think he was interested to really see a patient or something like that, I understand. But we both had heard about each other. We belonged to a generation of biologists, call them biochemists or whatever, biologists, who were far fewer than what we find today. I think every year, perhaps about 6, 7, 8 of them used to return. And it was a small club which had many things in common. Many things in common, one of which was the extraordinary inspiration we derived working in the area of biology in the mid-50s in the United States, which was really the most romantic period and also the most productive period, which was a game changer. You know, I always wonder, we say we are, when we say the director of atomic energy, founder of atomic energy, there is a certain awe and romance attached to that. I think there will come a time, perhaps this century, that a director of a biotechnology program will be on par in terms of the romance, in terms of the awe that you should feel for atomic energy. Because biology perhaps doesn't have that explosive nature to inspire you, nor the blinding and deafening aspects to energy, which was released by the atom. But I think what biology today we experience, it happened in the last century. I belong to the century. In the mid-50s, the 5th and the 6th decades were really spectacular in the achievements that biochemists made. And some of us, Ramachandran, myself, and a number of others who came back, had the great good fortune to be participating in that revolution in biology. The revolution in biology, whose fruits I think we are reaping today. And Ramachandran, in his very pure quintessence personality, mind you, was inspired, driven by that quality and trait in him, which he acquired in Urbana, Illinois. Because Urbana, Illinois, like Boston, from where I came, and he came from Urbana. In fact, I think when we met in Jaslok, by getting introduced by Ashok Ganguly, we immediately exchanged notes where we were. He knew about me and I knew about him. And that was with whom he was working. Urbana was a great center for modern biology, biochemistry. And so was Boston. Every new thing that happened in molecular biology, what we call today, biological sciences, which has influenced medicine, which has influenced agriculture, which has influenced almost everything that is living, they all were explosive discoveries made, modestly published, but acquiring Nobel Prizes for each one of those, and also getting immediate application in the area of medicine, which are spectacular. One of the things I noticed in Ramachandran on my first introduction was his tremendous, spontaneous enthusiasm for biological applications to modern science, modern medicine, because I happened to be at the time had the privilege of being the chief of pathology services and research at Jeslow Hospital. I began a couple of projects of my choice and liking in the area of diabetes, where I was looking at post-translational modification of proteins and also looking at some enzymes. I'm basically an enzymologist. And Urbana, where he got the training, was essentially full of enzymology and bacteriology. I think there the bacteria, their extraordinary versatility in doing things was so beautifully demonstrated, published, and they were pace setters in modern biology. And he worked with people who included, incidentally, William Rutter, who later on became professor in the University of San Francisco as a professor of biochemistry, but also the inventor of the hepatitis B vaccine, for which he got the world fame. In fact, it was Ramachandran, as secretary of DBT, who introduced me to Bill Rutter, who came to Bangalore, in fact, to visit us. And he was exploring whether we could really collaborate with them or invest some money in that company. Because he was working in a garage in near San Francisco, Oakland, with 4 or 5 scientists. In fact, he invited me there. But Ramachandran took me along with him on one of his visits to San Francisco for a meeting. He personally took me along to Genentech and what is Chiron today, the maker of hepatitis B vaccine. I think Ramachandran should go the credit, reputation, admiration, and reverence as a scientist. Reverence, I mean in a very positive sense, nothing really ritualistic about that. Reverence, because I think what he planted as the first secretary of biotechnology is going to grow in this century by the 30s or 40s, where I think it will acquire the same stature as atomic energy, perhaps more, because we have seen very recently the devastating effects of what biotechnology can do in the COVID situation. I won't go into the details. We have seen that. And also, equally gratifyingly, we have seen the power of biotechnology for our ability to cope with that situation. Power today to really treat diabetes with insulin, which can be made in a small little factory in a fermenter. Erythropoietin, which is a great lifesaver. You name them, I think I have hundreds of examples, more to come. But at the same time, the biological revolution is going to lead us also to dilemmas where their application is going to determine our happiness or misery and extinction. Therefore, I think the secretaryship of DBT assumes an extraordinary significance. And on the one path, I think we can really achieve glory, solve for millions of people the problem of availability of healthcare, food, all the things that are depending on biology. In fact, to be honest with you, the language of medicine today is medicine or agriculture or anything is chemical biology. The alphabets in which biology is written is in chemistry. And I think that is going to determine the future through the Department of Biotechnology or whatever the government does with this apparatus in order to regulate it. I think Ramachandran's foresight in seeing this great role for biology is so beautifully reflected that in the duration of his first tenure, first period of his work, he established equally strongly the development of human resources. The support of the DBT for education, basic training, university education, really created the manpower which can really be engaged in research work, application work, or commercial nature. The beneficiaries of the program were not only the industries, but also the national laboratories like IMTech Laboratory, CCMB, and I think most importantly, the Indian Institute of Science, where I live now, in Bangalore, which received an extraordinary amount of support in the beginning in those period. In fact, that has really catapulted a number of activities. For example, we recently, an account of the Biotechnology Industry Partnership Program, an industry got the person who really worked on it and made it a enterprise in terms of diagnosis of infectious diseases, was not only honored for his achievements in the industry as an engineer, but also cited by getting an award, the Infosys Award. I'm sorry, not the Infosys Award,
I would like to say something.
pardon? Why the the award that is given in Infosys Prize, which is given to scientists of high caliber who do original work, both of which are possible by a entrepreneur. In fact, I think these are people who are entrepreneurs, who are industrialists, who are really essentially scientists who are entrepreneurial. This is a memorable event because there's a group of us around the time his retirement. In the last, I want to recall a small event which took place, informal event, where some of us from Bangalore, of which I was one of them, the idea was mooted by Vishwamitra and Professor Vishwamitra in the Indian Institute of Science and Padma and a few people. We thought we must record for posterity as well as for the ruling dispensation at that time, the government of India, at the highest level possible, the ministers, the extraordinary work that Biotechnology Department had done under Dr. Ramachandran's leadership, and this consolidated and taken forward with all the support. This was the apprehension on the part of many. So I joined the delegation. The delegation was very informal. There was nothing publicized. We met every cabinet minister. From Manmohan Singh was the finance minister, Chidambaram, Kumar Mangalam. We met all of them, and with each one of them, we spent half an hour to an hour discussing. In fact, Dr. Manmohan Singh gave us almost an hour's time in his office. We had lunch, and then when we described to them the work that Biotechnology Department had done and where it can take the country, in fact, about 90% of what we were narrating, most of them knew. This is an astonishing thing. It came as a great surprise to us, and there was a total support expressed on their behalf for the continuance and the strengthening of the biotechnology department. In fact, I think we are paying honor to a man who was a scientist at heart, a very generous friend in his conduct and relationships, and a visionary who really planted this seed. And I think in this century, the coming decades, when biology is going to assume such a massive influence on human society for its welfare or destruction, where this country will go will very much depend upon the directions in which the Department of Biotechnology, in grateful memory to the first director. In fact, I think we should not hesitate even to call him the founder director. In a way, he founded it because the values he built into the organization, the objectives he brought in, were all his original thinking, were all his commitment to biology that he really imbibed, the spirit of biology which was going on at that time globally. That I think we can call him a founder without hesitation. I think all this must be dedicated to him. So on this very beautiful day when so many friends have gathered to tell so many things, I have the privilege to say a few words, and I really wish his family the very best, because I think they had a great husband and a father, and as much as he was a very good friend, I think he, as a family man, he was. The only unfortunate thing was his availability to most of us during the last days was limited. We all regretted that. But wherever he is, I can tell you that he will be still very happy and looking down on what is happening, looking down on where biology is going, where this country is going. Great leader. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Krishnaswamy. Madam Ramachandran, I see that you have raised your hand. Can we come to you? Can we come to you after we have heard Dr. Balram? Okay. Oh, okay. I would now invite Professor Balram. We don't need to introduce him, a man who is so well known to everybody in the sector, Professor Balram.
Thank you very much, Dr. John. I suspect that the people who are listening to this meeting will fall into two categories. Those who knew Dr. Ramachandran well and know all about his contributions. And hopefully there will be some who might actually be wondering, why is it that 30 years after Dr. Ramachandran retired as the Secretary of the Department of Biotechnology, are we all gathered here to pay a tribute to him? First, some facts. Dr. Ramachandran is in many ways the founder of the modern government effort in biotechnology in India. And he did this in the decade between 1982 and 1992. First, as the member secretary of the National Biotechnology Board, and then as the secretary of the Department of Biotechnology. Look at the dates, 1982 to 1992. At that time, biotechnology, when it started, there were many kinds of biotechnology. They've been alluded to here. There's agricultural biotechnology, there's aquaculture, but modern biotechnology in many ways is inextricably linked to recombinant DNA technologies. And therefore, we must ask, what is the history of molecular biology? One can have many histories, but I would say that the first shot of the biotechnology revolution was really fired when Arthur Kornberg made DNA in the test tube with the enzyme DNA polymerase. So you could make DNA in the test tube. That was 1957. 13 years later, Hargobind Khurana in 1970 made DNA by chemical synthesis. It took a decade plus 3 years. In the intervening decade after that, after 1970, many things happened. But most importantly, recombinant DNA research was begun by Paul Berg, and the first recombinant DNA molecules were made in 1972. The dates are important because we are coming to 1982. 1973-74 was when Boyer and Cohn really reproduced DNA in E. coli, which was recombinant DNA. This was now heterologous expression of DNA. And when did insulin come? Insulin came much later. Genentech came first in 1976 and recombinant insulin in 1978. Look at this timeline. 1978 in the United States, recombinant insulin is produced. We are already in the early 1980s beginning to think of biotechnology. And Ramachandran is the man chosen to spearhead this effort. One thing I must say, if there are some students here, and even for the older people, the most important thing to remember about biotechnology is you can't take biology and chemistry out of biotechnology. They were always there. They were there even before the word biotechnology was invented. In India, the first sign of interest in biology was in the third five-year plan. In 1964, M.S. Swaminathan, then Member Planning Commission, actually had a paragraph in the third five-year plan on the need for a national biological laboratory. But this was shelved. Eventually, we have a national physical laboratory and a national chemical laboratory, but we don't have a national biological laboratory. In the 1970s, this surfaced again. There was a proposal at that time circulated by Pushpa Bhargava for a national biological laboratory. Of course, we didn't get one laboratory, but we got many biological laboratories in the subsequent years. Much of this was because by this time, Dr. Ramachandran had come center stage in Delhi. He was at the NBTB and later at the DBT. So in many ways, we are paying a tribute to a man who really laid the foundations for biotechnology in India. But when we do pay tribute to him, we must remember the difficult conditions under which he established the department. The decade of the 1970s, when all these advances took place in America, was also a very turbulent decade in India. The 1970s, beginning 1971, all the way till the return of Indira Gandhi in 1980, was a politically and economically difficult time in India. And very little by way of progress in science and technology. New programs could not be initiated at that time. It would happen only in the decade of the 1980s and much later. Ramachandran had a very clear idea of what was needed. He knew that getting lots of people trained in the modern technologies of biology was absolutely critical. And Professor Kannan has already referred to that. The human resource development programs that he started are the ones which have produced the manpower. Today, we use the word entrepreneur very easily. In the 1970s, we had not heard of the word entrepreneur. None of us used it. It was only much, much later that that word came into our language. So when we remember this, we must pay a tribute to a man who was extremely far-sighted and also had the ability, and I did see him at fairly close quarters for a while, he had the ability to talk to very senior people and also to very junior people in just the way that they should be talked to. So he made the very junior people very comfortable. I was one of them. And so one could disagree with him, one could tell him whatever one wanted, and he would listen to you very patiently. I will recall just one episode which tells you how things were then. In 1982-83, India was bidding for the International Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology. The United Nations with the UNIDO had decided to set up these laboratories, and every country could in principle bid for it. It was a political matter. One center was, of course, to come in Trieste in Italy, but the second center had not been decided. The United Nations and the UNIDO sent an international committee to Delhi, and the job of this was to assess what kind of biological research was going on in India. So several people were called to present before this committee, and I was one of them. I was probably very young at that time, inexperienced, and I went along to this meeting. The meeting was presided over by Professor M.G.K. Menon, who was then the chairman of the National Biotechnology Board. Dr. Varadarajan had just taken over as the secretary of the Department of Science and Technology, and Dr. Ramachandran was the member secretary of the National Biotechnology Board. So all these three people were there. But what stays in my mind is they were so enthusiastic about making the best possible bid for this international laboratory in India. They were, of course, fortunate to have the strong support of the then Prime Minister, Mrs. Gandhi. But when these presentations were being made, had never gone away from my memory, the slide projector and the overhead projector were managed by Dr. Varadarajan and Dr. Ramachandran, who did not want to leave this detail to anyone else, so that there would be no mistakes and the international committee would go away all impressed. Eventually, of course, the International Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology came to Delhi. If you have a catalogue of the many things which were accomplished during Dr. Ramachandran's tenure, it would be a very large catalogue. Some of it's actually been told by the speakers who have preceded me. But what really comes through is that here was an individual who recognized the changing contours of a field when it was happening. It's very easy to recognize something after it has been recognized by everybody else, especially recognized by Nobel Prizes. Otherwise, you have to recognize it while it's happening. And I think Dr. Ramachandran was extraordinarily good at reading, listening, and assimilating information, and then deciding what he would do with the information. So I think I'd like to really thank Dr. John and Professor Kannan for having actually put together this program and given those of us who knew Dr. Ramachandran a chance to come back together, albeit virtually, and remember a man who did a wonderful job in India for the biotechnology sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Balram, for those wonderful words, recapitulating what Dr. Ramachandran was. And it is so nice of you to have remembered those very interesting episodes, many of those which are not known to many of us. Thank you so much. We have formally come to the end of the panel. Now I think we should open up for questions. Is that okay, Professor Kannan? And you are muted. And Madam Ramachandran, I saw your hand going up. Would you like to make a remark?
I just wanted, am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. I just want to tell you how overwhelming and it is to find all of you talking about him. We remember him every day. After 30 years after his retirement, and you people remember him so very vividly, and all these anecdotes that you have shared with us, with this family. I'm so very gratified and so thankful to all of you.
Thank you, madam. Surya, are you here? Would you like to say something? A short intervention, Surya?
I think you people go ahead and with your discussion.
Okay.
We'll
Are there any questions from the audience or any points of intervention?
Yeah, Surya is there.
Okay, Surya, you are there?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, please.
Let me tell you just one story that nobody else has told you. We were there in C1 by 10 Moti Bagh, and I'd got admission to the University of Illinois with a full fellowship, and he was shaving. And then I said, I've got admission in your alma mater. And he's shaving. Aren't you excited? He turned around to me and said this one thing: a diamond is a diamond, whether in a whole bunch of velvet with lights shining on it, or in a heap of cow dung. A diamond is a diamond. You do what you have to do. Become the best at what you have to do. That's all that I expect of everybody that I talk to in my department, in my family. And he's look at those jamadars. Those days, in Delhi, there were jamadars who he said, you become the head of jamadar. You'll have 15 lorries, 20 lorries. You'll become I could not even understand that. And then when I went to the University of Illinois and I got my master's from there, I understood exactly what Appa said. It's very simple. It's an advice that he gave everybody. Become the best you are in your field. All that money, all that recognition is all secondary. It will all come. Strive to become the best in the country.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Surya, for those wonderful words and recollecting the man. You have recollected him from a different perspective. That's something very, very personal. Thanks for sharing it. Is there anybody else? Anybody want to raise a point? Any intervention? I don't know if Professor Dr. Ramaswamy is here. He told me that he might join. I had asked earlier also, but there was no response. I don't see him in the list of participants. Well,
Professor Muralidhar is there. I thought he
Okay.
wanted to make some. So can you request him?
Yeah, Professor Muralidhar.
Thank you, Dr. John. I was not fortunate to know him personally from close quarters. I didn't work with him either as the administration or anywhere else. But I had first met Dr. Ramachandran in 85, if I remember, in the Pachmarhi Guha Research Conference. I was introduced to him, and I was a young lecturer. Therefore, I was talking very much about our own work and told him about the buffalo endocrinology and its importance. He said, we are doing something else. We have not graduated to the level that you are talking about. When it comes, we will request you to do the thing. And that came only in 1995 when John gave us a project to produce buffalo hormones, classical biochemistry work. Unfortunately, the field also had progressed to so much that if you make a quantitative analysis of this whole work, biochemical work, the amount of hormone that you have is not good enough to take it as a national program. So they had to take recourse to recombinant DNA technology. I remember still DBT funded many people to produce recombinant buffalo FSH and other required hormones. Nothing came out of it. In fact, even the embryo transfer technology program also didn't have a great success. This is one of the unfortunate things that happened. More than 100 crores have gone in. And I also must admit now that the people who practiced it in the initial days were actually doing the wrong thing. They were importing porcine follicle stimulating hormone and using it to induce superovulation in buffaloes. It's exactly a wrong thing to do. We'll not go into detail all these things. But then my couple of times when I met Ramachandran, I was deeply impressed by his vision and his ability to convert it into a mission. And that's how you see this mission-bound funding, which I think DBT pioneered. Earlier, we didn't have that. We had something called thrust areas. But then people know what these thrust areas, they're all thrusted areas. They're not thrust areas. So it was Ramachandran's capability to do that. As I said, I didn't work with him closely, but the other names that people mentioned, like Varadarajan, KKG Menon, and all that, I was close to them. In fact, my first project on buffalo hormones was given by Hindustan Liver, KKG Menon, and he was almost forcing me to go and join Bombay rather than work in Delhi University. I recall all these things because Ramachandran, I can compare him like 1 hour Bush for USA. I think he saw the coming up biotechnology, but the very importance of the basic science, both biology and biochemistry. Krishnaswamy Garu has made a very good remark, but if you analyze this growth, you notice that somehow people have the desire to cut the umbilical cord. Biochemistry came as an offshoot of chemistry, but moment you start separate departments of biochemistry, you lost the spirit. Today, you see a biochemistry being practiced empirically. Same thing, biotechnology, right in the beginning, it should have started in engineering colleges with completely microbiology, fermentation technology, engineering principles, chemical engineering, solid biochemistry. All this should have been started. But anyway, a beginning was made. It went to some extent. But if Ramachandran had continued, I'm sure he would have taken it to its logical conclusion. As we say, many great entrepreneurs had come out of this soil based on biotechnological principles. I will end at this point because I had many other interactions, but this is not the time to talk about all that.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Muralidhar. Professor Kannan, would you like to?
I was thinking, no, I just thought Professor Sitaramam is also there.
Okay.
And you ask him to say a few of his impressions. because he spent so many years in Pune University. Professor Sitaramam?
Thank you, Karnan.
Mm.
I knew Dr. Ramachandran personally. When I was to join Pune University, he actually asked me to come and join him in Delhi. I had to make a difficult choice. Do I carry on an administrative career or do I go on research and teaching? I chose research and teaching. And I was always impressed with the way he carried out the things, conversations. He was always at ease, generally talking with people. And I was just thinking, if the biotechnology had not been, I was listening to most of you, I was just thinking if, we have done rather well on this COVID issue in this country, regardless of what New York Times says. The point is, had the programs not been there, how would we have done? So history is always full of ifs and buts. But I certainly think that this movement has somehow caught on, and when we had a crisis, I think it helped in more ways than we can imagine. I can partly vouch for it as a former medical man. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Professor Kannan, would you like to wrap up the discussion?
Yeah. I think I must first thank Dr. George John for being an excellent moderator. And I must thank all the panelists for readily agreeing to participate and give their impressions. I think at least so nice to recall somebody, after 30 years, as rightly put. And I think certainly he will keep talking about him. And I'm sure I was just talking this morning to Dr. Natesh. I wish we can put a chronological order of his contribution so that, people should recollect how, under what circumstances all these things came up and how we pushed the program. Because, he did not have the luck like Homeje Baba had, the kind of support and assistance. But still, Dr. Ramachandran went ahead because unlike atomic energy, which is a more, Prime Minister's full support and nobody interfered with it, here we had the social problems, people protesting against genetic crops, this, that, and all that. And I'm sure Dr. P.K. Ghosh must have gone through it much more, drafting the policies. Plus, as Professor Balram rightly said, there are too many contenders for biotechnology. Every zoologist, every biochemist, everybody thought they were biotechnologists. So we had that identity crisis for a very long time. So if you say you are teaching this, we are also teaching that. So I think he fought all those battles and started with 5 universities. And I wish we had strengthened them, just like IITs also started as few institutions only. And we should have spread. Sometimes I wonder whether have we spread out too thin, that we couldn't benefit out of it. I may be right, I may be wrong. But I think we need to do some mid-course correction, I personally feel at this point, that I wish the new education policy had thought about it, because we are talking about interdisciplinary kind of teaching, etc. I think we need to strengthen the universities and engineering colleges, I feel. And certainly, I think at least Dr. Ramachandran's vision has been, realized to a large extent, and it still survives. Nobody has closed that department, I think. So that speaks volume. So I would like to thank all the panelists and the moderator for having come and shared their views. And I'll certainly upload it on the YouTube so that those people who couldn't attend will certainly be able to. And I request some of you to at least put on record, various things he did, because there's no place, when I look at the internet, I don't know what all he did. Today is the first time we heard a lot of people saying. I think I request people like Natesh or George John or Ghosh and all to sit down and put all the things in place, because you were at the heart of the whole operation. We were all field workers. I think it will do a great tribute to the man. And thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Good evening.